LeBron James walked down the busy streets of downtown, his towering frame making him impossible to miss. The air was crisp, and the sounds of honking cars mixed with the chatter of pedestrians. It was just another evening in the city, until something caught his eye. A small boy, no older than 10, stood outside a convenience store. His clothes were worn, his sneakers scuffed, and his hands clutched a few crumpled bills. He hesitated before stepping inside. LeBron, out of curiosity, slowed his pace and watched. Through the store's glass window, he saw the boy approach the counter. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man with a stern face, barely glanced at him before shaking his head. The boy's shoulders slumped. He tried to explain something, pointing at a loaf of bread on the shelf. The shopkeeper waved him off dismissively. LeBron's brows furrowed. Something about the exchange felt wrong. Was the man refusing to serve the kid? LeBron's steps quickened as he approached the store's entrance. Before he pushed open the door, he turned to the camera. "Hold up, before we get into this. If you believe in standing up for what's right, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next." As the door chimed, LeBron stepped into the store, his presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. The shopkeeper barely looked up, still shaking his head at the boy. "I told you, kid, I don't have time for this. If you're not buying, leave," the man said, his tone sharp. The boy tightened his grip on the money in his hand. "I have enough. I just want the bread," he said softly. The shopkeeper scoffed. "That's not the problem. I don't serve people like you." LeBron's eyes narrowed. "People like you." He took a step closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over the counter. The boy looked down, his face burning with embarrassment. "Hold up," LeBron said, his voice calm but firm. "What do you mean by that?" The shopkeeper finally looked up and let out a small, forced chuckle. "Oh, come on, it's not a big deal. I run a business. I decide who I serve." LeBron exhaled slowly, studying the man. The boy clenched his jaw, his hands trembling slightly. LeBron glanced at the boy, then back at the shopkeeper. He had seen this kind of attitude before. The kind that made people feel small, like they didn't belong. And he wasn't about to let it slide. LeBron took a deep breath and stepped forward, his large frame making the cramped store feel even smaller. The shopkeeper finally noticed him, his expression shifting from irritation to sudden recognition. "Wait, yeah, I know who I am," LeBron interrupted, his voice steady. "But right now, I want to know what's going on here." The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mix of surprise and hope. LeBron gave him a reassuring nod before turning back to the shopkeeper. "I told the kid to leave," the man said, crossing his arms. "I don't have to explain myself." LeBron raised an eyebrow. "You kinda do, because from where I'm standing it looks like you're refusing to sell him something for no good reason." The shopkeeper shrugged. "My store, my rules." LeBron let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. He placed his hands on the counter, leaning in slightly. "That's funny. See, where I come from, we don't turn away people just because we feel like it." The shopkeeper shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't back down. "Look, I don't want trouble." "Then maybe don't be the cause of it," LeBron shot back. The boy stood still, his eyes darting between them. For the first time, he saw someone standing up for him, and something about that made his heartbeat just a little stronger. The shopkeeper let out a sharp breath, clearly irritated. "Look, I don't care who you are. This isn't your business." LeBron's eyes stayed locked on him. "You made it my business when you decided to treat this kid like he doesn't matter." The boy shifted nervously, gripping the money in his hands. The shopkeeper scoffed. "You think you can just walk in here and tell me how to run my store?" LeBron chuckled, shaking his head. "Nah, man, I'm just asking why you're acting like this. The kid's got money. He's not asking for a handout. So, what's the problem?" The shopkeeper's jaw tightened. "I don't have to explain myself." LeBron leaned in slightly. "You kinda do, because right now, all I see is a grown man picking on a kid for no reason." The tension in the air thickened. A few other customers in the store had started paying attention. The shopkeeper glanced around, realizing that people were watching. He forced a smile. "This is just a misunderstanding." LeBron crossed his arms. "Good, then clear it up. Sell him the bread." The shopkeeper hesitated, his fingers drumming against the counter, but instead of admitting defeat, he doubled down. "I don't have to sell to anyone I don't want to," he said coldly. LeBron's expression hardened. "That's your final answer?" The shopkeeper smirked. "Yeah, it is." LeBron exhaled slowly. "All right, then I guess we've got a problem." The boy looked down at the crumpled bills in his hands, his fingers tightening around them. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but the weight of embarrassment held him back. LeBron noticed. He knelt slightly to meet the boy's eyes. "Hey, kid, you all right?" The boy hesitated before nodding weakly, but LeBron could see the truth in his eyes. "Tell me what's going on," he said gently. The boy took a deep breath. "My mom. She's sick," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She hasn't been able to work, and we don't have much food at home. I just wanted to get this bread for her." LeBron's expression softened. "That's why you came here alone?" The boy nodded. "Yeah. I saved up a little from doing small jobs, carrying groceries for neighbors, cleaning up yards. I finally had enough to buy this." He looked back at the loaf of bread on the shelf. "But he won't let me." The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "Look, I don't run a charity." LeBron's jaw tightened, but he kept his focus on the boy. "You've been taking care of your mom all by yourself?" The boy gave a small nod. "She always took care of me. Now it's my turn." LeBron glanced around the store. Other customers were watching, some whispering to each other. He looked back at the shopkeeper, his expression unreadable. "You hear that?" LeBron said, his voice steady but firm. "This kid isn't asking for a favor. He's doing what a real man does, taking care of his family, and you won't even sell him a loaf of bread?" The shopkeeper shifted uncomfortably, but he still didn't say anything. LeBron exhaled. "You got no idea how strong this kid is, but I do." The boy looked up at him, a flicker of hope in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't feel invisible. Someone saw him, someone cared. The shopkeeper folded his arms, his expression hardening. "Look, I don't need a lecture from you," he scoffed. "I've been running this store for years. I don't have to explain my decisions to anyone, especially not some celebrity trying to play hero." LeBron let out a slow breath, his eyes never leaving the man. "Hero? Nah, man, just a guy who doesn't like seeing people get treated unfairly." The shopkeeper smirked. "Unfair? This is business. I choose who I sell to. That's my right." LeBron nodded slightly, as if considering his words. "So, let me get this straight. You've got a paying customer, a kid just trying to buy food for his sick mom, and you'd rather throw him out than take his money?" The shopkeeper shrugged. "Like I said, my store, my rules." A few customers murmured in the background. Some shook their heads in disapproval. The tension in the room thickened, but the shopkeeper stood firm, his pride outweighing reason. LeBron studied him for a moment, then gave a small knowing smile. "You ever been hungry before?" he asked. The shopkeeper flinched just for a second. His jaw tightened. "That's none of your business." LeBron took a step closer. "Because if you had, you'd know what this feels like. You'd know what it's like to stare at food you can't have, knowing someone's deciding whether you deserve to eat." The shopkeeper's face darkened. "I'm not the bad guy here." LeBron tilted his head. "Then prove it." But the man didn't say a word. He just clenched his jaw and stood his ground, refusing to back down. LeBron exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "Man, you really don't get it, do you?" His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. The shopkeeper smirked. "I get that you think you can walk in here and tell me how to run my business." LeBron took another step closer, his towering presence now impossible to ignore. "Nah, I'm not here to run your business. I'm here because I can't stand watching someone with power use it the wrong way." The shopkeeper rolled his eyes. "Power? This is just a store." LeBron's gaze sharpened. "Nah, this is bigger than that. You think power is about having control over people, deciding who's worth your time and who isn't. But real power? It's about lifting people up, not pushing them down." The boy looked up at LeBron, hanging on to every word. LeBron turned back to the shopkeeper. "You could have done the right thing the moment this kid walked in, but instead you chose pride over kindness, and that's weakness, not strength." The shopkeeper's smirk faded, but he still held his ground. "I don't need a life lesson from you." LeBron sighed. "You might not want it, but you sure as hell need it." He looked around at the other customers who were now fully engaged, some nodding in agreement. The shopkeeper's fingers tapped against the counter, a flicker of doubt flashing across his face, but he wasn't ready to back down. Not yet. LeBron straightened up, his expression firm. "Last chance, do the right thing." The shopkeeper stared at him, his jaw tightening. The entire store was silent, waiting for his next move. The silence in the store was thick, the air heavy with unspoken tension. Customers stood frozen, their eyes darting between LeBron and the shopkeeper, waiting to see who would break first. The boy clutched his money tightly, his breath shallow, as if afraid that any sudden movement would shatter whatever fragile control remained in the room. The shopkeeper's fingers drummed against the counter, his eyes narrowing. "You think you can just walk in here, call me weak, and expect me to change my mind?" His voice was low, but the defiance in it was clear. LeBron didn't flinch. "I expect you to be a decent human being." His tone was calm, but there was steel beneath it. The shopkeeper let out a dry laugh, shaking his head. "People like you, always thinking you can throw your weight around, make the rest of us look like villains. I don't owe anyone anything." LeBron took a slow step forward. "This ain't about me. It's about that kid, and you know it." He motioned toward the boy, whose eyes flickered with hope and fear, both emotions battling inside him. The shopkeeper's gaze wavered just for a second, but then he clenched his jaw. "I run this store my way." LeBron exhaled sharply. "And that's the problem. You think helping someone is weakness. But let me tell you something, real strength. It's knowing when to put your ego aside and do the right thing." The shopkeeper's lips pressed into a thin line. He could feel the weight of the stares around him, the judgment settling in. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. The tension in the store crackled like a live wire. No one moved, no one spoke. The moment stretched long and thin, as if the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. A murmur rippled through the small crowd inside the store. Customers who had been silent before were now whispering among themselves, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disapproval. Some shook their heads, Others exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the way the shopkeeper was treating the boy. A middle-aged woman near the drink section crossed her arms. "This ain't right," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. A younger man, wearing a hoodie, nodded. "Yeah, man, the kid's just trying to buy some food. What's the problem?" Another customer, an older gentleman, sighed. "Back in my day, shopkeepers took care of the community. They didn't turn kids away like this." The shopkeeper's face darkened. He could feel the shift in the room, the weight of the eyes now pressing against him. He opened his mouth to argue, but before he could, another voice spoke up. "If you won't sell it to him, I will," a woman near the register said. She stepped forward, pulling out her wallet. "I'll buy the bread." A few others nodded in agreement. "Yeah, me too," someone else said. LeBron folded his arms, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. He hadn't needed to say anything. People were speaking up on their own now. The shopkeeper looked around, realizing he was outnumbered. His fingers twitched against the counter. His confidence, once so solid, was starting to crack under the weight of the public's judgment. He could feel it. He was losing control of the situation. And the worst part? He knew they were right. The shopkeeper clenched his jaw, his eyes darting around the store. He could feel the walls closing in, the weight of every stare pressing against him. His fingers tapped against the counter, his mind racing. Finally, he let out a sharp breath and muttered, "Fine." "You all want to know why?" The store went silent. Even LeBron raised an eyebrow, waiting. The shopkeeper exhaled heavily, running a hand over his face. "That kid?" He gestured toward the boy. "I know his family." His voice was lower now, almost hesitant. The boy stiffened. "You know my mom?" The shopkeeper nodded. "Yeah, a long time ago." His expression flickered with something unreadable, regret, frustration, maybe both. "She used to come here with your father." The boy's face twisted in confusion. "My father?" The shopkeeper looked away for a second, then back at the boy. "He and we had history, bad history." His voice was bitter, his hands gripping the counter. "He owed me money, a lot of it, and when things got tough he disappeared, left me hanging." LeBron's expression darkened. "So, what? You're punishing his kid for something his father did?" The shopkeeper's lips pressed into a thin line. "It's not that simple." The boy's eyes filled with emotion. "My dad left us too," he whispered. "He's been gone for years. My mom had nothing to do with that." The shopkeeper blinked, caught off guard. The truth hung in the air, raw and undeniable. LeBron leaned in, his voice low but firm. "So now you know. This ain't about the past, it's about right now. That kid's just trying to take care of his mom, just like you would if you were in his shoes." The shopkeeper's breathing was uneven. He looked at the boy, really looked at him, as if seeing him for the first time. His grip on his pride was slipping. And for the first time since this all started, he wasn't so sure he had been right. The shopkeeper stood there, frozen for a moment, processing the weight of his own words. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths as his mind raced. For the first time, he saw the boy not as just a customer, but as a kid, struggling to help his family, carrying a burden he had no right to impose. The hard shell he had built around himself began to crack. LeBron watched him closely, waiting, as the shopkeeper's gaze flickered between the boy and the counter. His hands trembled slightly, unsure of what to do next. I never thought about it like that," the shopkeeper muttered, his voice softer now. "I just saw the past, the anger, and let it control me." LeBron nodded slowly, his tone gentle but firm. "That's the thing about pride. It blinds you, but it's never too late to see the truth." The shopkeeper took a long, shaky breath. The tension in his shoulders slowly began to release. He glanced at the other customers, their eyes filled with quiet judgment and expectation. He looked down at the boy, his voice quieter now, almost remorseful. "I'm sorry," he said, the words almost foreign on his tongue. "I should have seen you as someone who needed help, not someone I could push around." The boy blinked, caught off guard. "Wait, you mean—" The shopkeeper nodded, his gaze softening. "Yeah, I'll sell you the bread." He reached for the loaf, placing it gently on the counter. "And I won't turn you away again." LeBron gave a small approving nod. Sometimes it takes a little help from someone else to remind us what really matters. The shopkeeper exhaled, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his pride had finally lifted. It was a small gesture, but it was enough to begin healing the cracks he hadn't even known existed. And as he rang up the bread, for the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. The boy stood still, his heart pounding in his chest, as the shopkeeper rang up the bread. He couldn't believe it. After all the time spent worrying, after all the failed attempts, here he was, finally getting what he came for. But it wasn't just the bread that mattered now. It was the small, unspoken change that had just occurred. He glanced at LeBron, who gave him a small, reassuring smile. The boy's eyes welled up with tears, but he quickly blinked them away. He couldn't remember the last time someone stood up for him like this, let alone someone with as much power and influence as LeBron James. As the shopkeeper bagged the bread, the boy took a deep breath. "Thank you," he whispered, looking up at LeBron. LeBron nodded. "You don't have to thank me. You just had the courage to stand up for yourself. That's something not everyone can do." The boy looked down at the bread, his hands still gripping it tightly. He had made it this far. He had taken care of his mom all this time, never backing down, even when the odds seemed impossible. And now, standing in that store, he felt a quiet strength within him. This moment, this small victory, felt bigger than just buying bread. It was a reminder that sometimes, even in the face of adversity, the right thing could still happen, and that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. He turned to the shopkeeper, who was no longer looking at him with disdain, but with a kind of quiet understanding. "Thanks," the boy said again, his voice stronger now. The shopkeeper nodded, a silent apology in his eyes. As the boy left the store, the weight on his shoulders seemed just a little lighter. He had not only gotten the bread, but he had also gained a small victory in a world that so often overlooked him. And as he stepped out into the sunlight, he knew that this was a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. LeBron stood silently for a moment, watching the boy leave the store with the bread in his hands. As he turned to walk out, LeBron couldn't help but reflect on his own journey. He had seen many difficult moments in his life, moments that had tested him, pushed him to the edge. But in that moment, something about seeing that boy's strength and resilience reminded him of the core of who he was and why he did what he did. LeBron thought back to his own childhood, growing up in tough neighborhoods, watching his mother work endlessly to give him a chance at a better life. There were times when he, too, had faced challenges that seemed insurmountable, when life had pushed him to the brink. But it was the moments of kindness and support from others, the people who saw potential in him even when he didn't see it in himself, that had made all the difference. He looked back at the shopkeeper, who was now standing quietly behind the counter, still processing the situation. Sometimes we forget the power we hold over others, even in the smallest moments, LeBron thought to himself. But when we use that power to lift others up, that's when real change happens. LeBron smiled to himself. He wasn't just a basketball player. He was someone who had the chance to make an impact off the court, too. And it wasn't always the big acts that mattered. Sometimes it was the little moments of humanity that made all the difference. As he walked out of the store, he realized that he had just witnessed a powerful reminder of the impact we can have on one another. The boy, in his quiet way, had shown a strength that LeBron admired. And in that simple, unexpected moment, LeBron remembered why he always tried to be more than just an athlete. He wanted to be someone who made a difference, no matter how small the gesture. He smiled, knowing that this day, this small act of kindness would stay with him for a long time. LeBron took one last look at the store, his mind already working on what came next. He had seen how quickly the situation had changed, how a simple act of standing up for someone could shift the energy in a room, but it wasn't enough to just make a difference in this one moment. He knew that true change needed a plan, something lasting. He thought about the boy, his courage, and the struggles he faced every day. This wasn't just about one store, one interaction. It was about the bigger picture. The challenges so many kids like him faced, the lack of opportunity, the feeling of being overlooked by those in power. Maybe it's time to make that change, LeBron thought, his mind racing. He had the platform, the resources, and the ability to reach people. It was time to use that for more than just basketball. It was time to create something bigger, a movement to support kids, to give them a voice and a chance no matter where they came from. LeBron made a mental note to start something, an initiative, a foundation that not only helped kids with basic needs like food and shelter, but also gave them the tools to rise above the challenges they faced. He had always used his platform to raise awareness, but now it was time to take direct action. He imagined a mentorship program where athletes and community leaders could come together to support young people, help them see their potential, and guide them toward a brighter future. LeBron knew firsthand how important it was to have someone in your corner, someone who believed in you when the world might not. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became. The situation in that store had reminded him of how much power each of us had to make a change. Whether big or small, every action counted, and now it was time to take that first step and make a real difference. Not just for that boy, but for countless others who needed someone to stand up for them. With a final glance back at the store, LeBron walked away, already planning the next steps to bring his vision to life. The real work was just beginning. As LeBron walked down the street, the weight of his thoughts began to settle in. The decision to act on the situation he had just witnessed wasn't a small one. It was a commitment, one that would take more than just words, more than just the hope that things would change on their own. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, quickly texting a few key people, his team, some of his closest advisors, and a few friends he trusted. He needed their support to bring this vision to life. But even as his fingers typed, LeBron knew that the real test wouldn't come from the people he surrounded himself with. The real test would come from his own dedication to this cause, from his ability to follow through on his promises and push through the challenges that lay ahead. The first test was his resolve. Could he maintain his focus on this mission when life and his career got busy? Could he ensure that this initiative didn't fade into the background like so many other well-meaning projects had in the past? LeBron knew that the success of this plan wouldn't just be measured by how much money or attention it garnered. It would be measured by how many lives it impacted, by the small victories it created for kids just like the one he had met in the store. His phone buzzed with replies, but he didn't open them immediately. Instead, he paused, reflecting on what had just transpired. The store, the boy, the shopkeeper. Everything had led him here. And now that the path was clear, he could feel the weight of the responsibility he was about to take on. In that moment, he realized something important. This was more than just an idea. It was a call to action. His influence, his voice, those were tools he could use to change the lives of countless young people, just as he had once been changed by the support of others. LeBron took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision and the responsibility ahead of him. But instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt determined. He had been tested many times before in his life. But now, as he stood at the crossroads of change, he knew that the real test had just begun. The challenge was no longer about a game on the court. It was about creating a legacy that would outlast basketball, one that would shape the future for those who needed it most. With a final deep breath, LeBron smiled. This was just the beginning. Weeks passed, and the idea that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a small store started to take shape. LeBron's initiative, aimed at supporting underprivileged kids and offering them the opportunity to change their lives, had taken on a life of its own. It wasn't just a foundation anymore. It was a movement. But the real test came one evening as LeBron sat in a small community center surrounded by a group of young people. They were from all walks of life. Kids who had struggled with the same challenges the boy in the store had faced. They were skeptical at first, unsure if this was just another empty promise from someone in the spotlight. LeBron stood in front of them, his presence commanding attention. "I know what it's like," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I know what it's like to feel like the world's against you, to feel like you're invisible. But I'm here to tell you, you are not invisible. Your struggles, your dreams, they matter." The room was silent, but the energy shifted. These kids were listening, and they could feel the sincerity in LeBron's words. "I've seen how the world can tear you down," he continued, his gaze sweeping over them. "But I've also seen how the smallest bit of support, the smallest act of kindness, can change everything." A young girl in the front row spoke up. "But it's hard. People give up on us all the time. Why should we believe that things can change?" LeBron smiled softly. "Because I'm not asking you to believe in me. I'm asking you to believe in yourself. I've been where you are. I know what it feels like to have nothing, to feel like the world is too big for you. But I also know that no matter where you come from, you have the power to change your story." There was a long pause as the kids processed his words. Then, slowly, one by one, they began to open up. The conversation shifted from doubt to hope, from fear to possibility. LeBron listened, offering advice, guidance, and support, just as he had promised. In that moment, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. The true impact of his initiative wasn't just in the donations, the resources, or the programs. It was in the belief he had helped instill in these kids. He had given them more than just a chance at a better life. He had given them a vision of what was possible. As the evening came to a close, the room felt lighter, the air charged with a sense of newfound purpose. The kids left with a spark in their eyes, a sense that their future was no longer something to fear. They had the power to shape it. LeBron watched them leave, a quiet smile on his face. He had done what he set out to do, but more importantly, he had witnessed a shift. The power of belief, the power of showing up for one another, had created a turning point, not just for those kids but for everyone involved. And in that moment, LeBron knew that this was the real victory. The game wasn't over, but the scoreboard had changed. As the evening drew to a close, LeBron sat quietly, reflecting on everything that had happened. From the moment he stepped into that store to this very moment, where he was watching the next generation find their voice. He thought about the boy, the shopkeeper, and all the lives that had been touched along the way. It wasn't just about a single act of kindness anymore. It was about a ripple effect, a shift in the way people viewed one another, and the impact of those small, seemingly insignificant moments. LeBron had seen firsthand how one decision, one choice to stand up for someone else, could create a domino effect, leading to something much larger. It wasn't always easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but the real change came from persistence, from showing up every single day, no matter how difficult. The most important lesson he had learned, and one he wanted to pass on to every person he met, was that no one was beyond help. No dream was too big, no challenge too impossible. Whether you were a kid trying to buy a loaf of bread or a community trying to lift itself up, the power to change was always within reach. All it took was courage, belief, and the willingness to take that first step. LeBron thought about his own journey, how much it had shaped him into the person he was today. It wasn't just about basketball or fame. It was about using the platform he had to lift others up, to show them that they mattered. He had gone from someone fighting just to make it to someone who could help others do the same. As the last of the kids left the center, LeBron stood up, feeling a quiet satisfaction in knowing that he had been part of something bigger than himself. But he also knew the journey didn't end there. There was more work to do. The real victory wasn't just helping a few, it was inspiring many, showing them that no matter what their circumstances were, they could rise above them. And as he walked out of the community center, he thought to himself, this is just the beginning. Because true change starts when we believe in each other, when we lift each other up, and that's a lesson we can all carry forward, no matter where we come from or where we're headed. If you found inspiration in this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us all of the power we hold within ourselves to make a difference. Together, we can create a world where kindness, compassion, and belief in one another drive us forward.